Okay, we're going to be covering rear remotes on a Kubota MX series. Now, I am doing 2 sets of rear remotes. The directions are going to be same whether you're doing 1 or 2 because they get stacked. And you'll see what I mean as we continue on. So, we're going to get straight to the chase, try and make this as concise as possible. First step, the whole thing came in 3 different boxes, by the way, again, for a 2 remote set. Okay, so the very first step is this bracket here is going to go right here. We're going to take these 2 bolts out, and then this bracket is going to go right in there, and then those 2 bolts will be used to retain that. And then the next step is going to be this piece here. The O-rings are in the kit. Find the O-ring for the hole. They're going to be a little big. Use your thumb to press them down in there, and we're going to put a little grease on there. And then this triangle-shaped side is going to go right here. We're going to take these 3 bolts out on this side cover, remove this side cover plate, and that's where this piece is going to go. So here's the cover plate I just took off, 12mm head, so 12mm socket, and you see when I put them side by side, everything lines up, the O-rings and all that. The kit did come with new bolts. I'm going to use the painted ones that were already on the tractor and just put them right back in with a little anti-seize. Okay, with that piece, we need to put this tube on. Now these O-rings are going to be the size of the end. We're going to have to stretch it down over to fit inside that groove. So very carefully stretch an O-ring over each side. And then that'll get put on with that block. Okay, along with removing that block plate, we also have to take out this plug right here. And that plug has a tube that plugs into it. And that tube goes into that end. And then it'll also fit in this part of our other piece we're putting in. So that's where that tube's going to go, in this end and then where that plug is. Okay, so we got this block here put in, and we tighten those down. And then we got this bracket here put in. These were 17mm bolts. It did help to lift up on this to take the weight off of them when I pulled them out. Now we're not tightening these down yet until we get these 2 bolts in. These are going to be the shorter bolts that came in the kit. So that attaches this bracket to the block we just put on. So we're going to tighten these down, then we will snug down these 17mm, and then we'll be done with these 2 parts. Okay, so to quickly recap, I hope this last section made sense to you. I forgot the tube, so I had to back up and redo that. So we took off the block plate, we put on this piece, and we also took out that plug with a flathead screwdriver, and then this tube goes into where that plug was and into this part of the block. Had an O-ring on each end. And then we have that fastened down to this bracket. We didn't tighten these 2 up until we already had those 2 lined up and started. Then we put these 2 in. So now moving on. Okay, so now we are ready for our valve assemblies. This is where I said these are going to be stacked. They're going to go one right up against the other, and then after the final one you'll have this block plate. So on this first one, I already have the O-rings in there, and then the next valve is going to get stacked on top of that. So you see the O-rings are in there. Valve gets stacked on top. I have to put these 3 O-rings in, and then I'll have the block plate. Let me show you how these O-rings go in. So each valve comes with a bag of O-rings. You're going to have different sizes in here. Your biggest skinny ones go in these oblong holes. Now it's a round O-ring. You're going to be turning it into an oblong shape as you press it in, just in case you had any questions on that. So we'll fit that O-ring in there. Press that one in there. Make sure they're all the way down in there. Just like that. And then I got one more here. And that goes in this hole. And now don't forget, you also have O-rings that are going to go in the piece that we put on the tractor already. So you also have 3 O-rings in there. So I have all my O-rings on, 3 in that valve, 3 in this valve. Then my block plate's going to go on top. And then, in true Kubota fashion, we were missing pieces. The bolts that came with this kit were not long enough to go through both valves and the block plate here. So I had to run to the store and grab those. So then these bolts are going to go all the way through both valve assemblies and the block plate, and then screw into that block on the tractor. So let's go take a look at that. So here you have the O-rings already in this piece, and now I'm going to put my 2 valves in the block plate and bolt them into these holes here that are threaded on this section here. So I'll go ahead and get that done. These pieces go facing up. This is where the handles are going to go, so that's how they're going to go in the tractor. Okay, so we have our valves and all that all bolted on tight there. Next thing we're going to do is put on this black bracket that came in your kit. Now you'll notice there's 2 holes at one end that are farther apart and 2 holes that are closer together. The 2 holes that are closer together are going to go right through your ROPS right here. So we're going to use these 2 holes here, and then the bar is going to face forward. I'll take a picture once it's done so you get the clear understanding. So go ahead and grab your bolts out of your kit, pass them down through there. Next thing we're going to be doing is installing these gray blocks. Quick side note, the bolts I had to go and get to reach through both valves and the cover plate were 4 5/8 inch long, and the thread type is M8 by 1.25. Just wanted to throw that out there. So on these gray blocks, you're going to see a little recessed area in there where a retainer clip's going to go later. That section is going to face the front of the tractor. So that's how those are going to go on. And they're going to go right through this back of this black bracket, and these will also be stacked. Okay, I didn't want to do this right away. I didn't know if these would interfere with doing the blocks or not, but they're not, so we can go ahead and do this now. We're going to put the handles on that go to each of these valves. So all you're going to do is we're going to feed this right up through the slot, and then that'll bring that around and line up there. And then you're going to have these pins, and you're going to put a washer on. You're going to put the pin through, then you're going to have another washer you're going to put on, and then you're going to put on your cotter pin. And these are tiny. Teeny, teeny, tiny. I didn't even see them in the bag, so be careful you don't lose these. You can go to the hardware store and get another one if you need to, but it's easier just to try not to lose them. So go ahead and put those on there, and that's how I already dropped it. I have to get the magnetic pickup tool, but so that's how these pins are going to go on and how we're going to install these handles. So a little tip, because of how tiny these clips are and how easy you're going to lose them, I'm already fishing for one. Go ahead and grab them with needle nose pliers, and then line them up with the holes, and they'll go right in. I couldn't fit my sausage fingers in there, and that's how I ended up dropping it. So that went in no problem. So I'm going to go ahead and finish getting that on there. I'll twist that. Then you have this rubber tube that you can slide right down over the handle. And then once you have that on, you have your black handle. Okay, so here we have our levers installed. You can run your pins any way you want to. I found it easier to run them facing in. One of these handles is longer than the other. I don't know if it matters which one goes where. It's probably more for your convenience. I imagine having a taller one by the fender would be easier. And then the plastic tube is shorter on this one. You can cut this one down. I don't know if it was intended for this or not. I don't believe it was. I think it'd be even too long for this rod, but you can cut it down if you like. All it does is keeps the metal handles from scratching up the paint when you're sliding these levers in and out here. So continuing on. Okay, next up we're going to be working with the bag of fittings you got and the hoses. So you have a couple fittings in there. You have 2 that have white thread tape on one end, and you have 2 that do not. And you'll also see this has a larger end and a smaller end, whereas the other fittings look like they're about the same. So on these fittings here, you're going to see a smooth spot where O-rings are going to be placed. So go ahead and install your O-rings on here. Like I say, you can see there that flat spot down below here where the O-ring is going to sit, and you see the other end doesn't have that. The other end is flared, and that's going to go on the hydraulic hose. So we have our O-rings on there. Now we're going to come over here and working on our first remote, we're going to pull off these 2 rubber boots here. That's where these are going to thread into. We're going to pop these rubber boots off. Okay, so we got that started, and what we're going to be using is a deep socket 22mm to install that. Okay, so once we have those installed, we're ready to put our hydraulic lines on those fittings. Now their 2 ends are straight, 2 ends have the metal bend in them. We're going to be installing the colored ends on this fitting, and you'll notice that these are free spinning ends. 22mm wrench. We'll go ahead and tighten these down. So we have the ends of these hydraulic lines started on the other end. They're mostly screwed in. They're just not completely tightened down yet because we still want these to be able to free spin around so that we can line them up with our remotes here. So we're going to go ahead and take care of this. So here you have this coupler piece and you have this fitting with the thread tape that's going to go in the end of that. So now use a 7/8 to hold it on one side and tighten the fitting down with 22 millimeter on the other side. Okay, once you have that tightened down, you can go ahead and pop that cap off, get it out of the way for a minute here. You're going to go ahead and feed this through here. Okay, so it just occurred to me, these are on backwards. That's the whole point of the video, so you don't make the mistakes I make. The picture was a bit confusing. I thought it looked like they were going on this way, so they just need spun around. So we're going to go ahead and take care of that real quick. And you'll see why here in a second. Okay, so these are going to go on with this little ring area in here facing the back of the tractor. This is then going to get fed through here. And then, let's pop that cap off here a minute. It's going to get fed through there, and then you're going to need snap ring pliers to install this snap ring, which then locks that in there from pulling out. That's all there is to that. And then on your cap, go ahead and put this loop on the back side. That's going to go on before we thread down the hose. Then we can go ahead and plug that in. So now, remember we didn't tighten this up yet on the other end. So now we want to go ahead and get this lined up and started on this section. Once I have this on there, I can go ahead and tighten this down, and then I can tighten down the other end. And you saw how I routed that behind this black bar. That's going to keep everything out of the way of the 3-point hitch. So I'm going to go ahead and tighten this down first, then I'll go ahead and snug down the other end. We'll do the same thing to the other remote, the other end of this remote, and then we'll get into our second remote. Okay, so there's our first remote installed. Not the easiest job in the world to get in there with a wrench, but you can do it. If you never understood why wrenches are slightly offset, you're going to learn here today why. You're going to have to keep spinning this around back and forth to get on that. Make sure you use 22 millimeter back here. 7/8 will work for tightening these fittings down up here because that is the standard size next to that metric 22. But down here you definitely want 22 where you have a good snug fit so you don't strip those out. If you have two 22 millimeter wrenches, kudos to you, sir. My hat is off. For the rest of us, you can get away with a 7/8 up here with a 22. But again, make sure you're using your 22 millimeter down here. So now we're going to go ahead and put our fittings in the second remote block. Okay, so just a reminder, repetition helps you remember, so we'll go over this again. We have our O-rings on these fittings, and these are going to get threaded in once we pull out those plugs in the valve. And it is going to be a little tighter working now because now we have other lines to work around. I've got the O-rings on there, and we're just going to get these in there as far as we can by hand. I'm stretching in there with a 22 millimeter deep socket and a good extension. Okay, now we're going to do the same thing for the second remote we did with the first remote. Now we're working with both red lines. So we're going to go ahead and put the straight ends on the valve side and get those snug down. We still want to be able to have movement in here to line up the other ends before we tighten these down. And so again, we have two more of these, and we have our fittings. You're going to put the white thread tape end into the couplers. Needle nose pliers are a real good way to get these plugs out. They can be a little hard to get out by using your fingers. Okay, same thing as the other one. Going to feed these right through. Get our snap ring pliers. Make sure those are clicked in the groove. And that one's in there. I'm going to go ahead and do the same thing for the other one here. Now before we tighten up the backs, don't forget to thread your plug in over the back of this coupler. And we can plug that in. So now we're ready to go ahead and get these on here. Again, we'll get them tightened down on this end. Okay, so we got our fittings on the coupler side tightened down. We then went and tightened down the other end on the valve side. That's all there is to it. Now we have some stickers to put on the tractor to let us know, label first function, second function, and that. So now what's left is fire the tractor up, get the RPMs up, work these valves back and forth, and pressure through the new system, check everything for leaks. Mine was all good, thankfully. I have a tendency to over tighten and break a lot of things. So when I tighten stuff down, I try to do it carefully. So sometimes I have to go back and tighten it just a little bit more, because I'd rather be a little loose than over tighten and break something. So if you do have any leaks, just go back through, see where it's at, tighten stuff down, and you should be good to go. So this wasn't near as hard as I expected it to be. When I first got the directions, I was like, what the heck? It was really just a matter of figuring out where to start. So again, that takes care of installing rear remotes on your Kubota MX series tractor. I really hope this video helped you out, and if you haven't subscribed yet, please do that now. Appreciate you watching.